Barker is absent. Bonnet. Fox. Cowth. Kennedy. McPherson is absent. Morgan. Pendrell. Plucker. Prestai. Quinn. Reddick. Salgado. Sotolongo is absent. Kratz.
Better turn this on. With that, the second item is the Open Meetings Act announcement. As always, we have a copy of the Open Meetings Act still over there. If you have any questions, you can consult that. Third item is approval of minutes from the previous meeting. Those were sent out a couple days ago. Hopefully you've all had a chance to at least skim them. Is there a motion to approve the minutes from the last meeting? Is there a second? A second? Guess we need to vote on it. Do you want to do a roll call on the vote?
Sure.
Okay.
Bonnet.
Yes.
Fox.
Yes.
Cowth.
Yes.
Kennedy.
Yes.
Morgan.
Yes.
Pendrell.
Yes.
Plucker.
Yes.
Prestai.
Yes.
Quinn.
Yes.
Reddick.
Yes.
Salgado. Kratz. Is that a yes for you?
Well, yes.
Motion passed.
Sorry. With that, we'll go to the subcommittee assignments. According to the rules that we passed, I was to make those assignments. I did. Emailed them to everybody. I hope everyone's satisfied with those assignments, and we won't be doing any of the subcommittees today. Perhaps in the next meeting or the meeting after, we'll break into subcommittees and go through the various proposals that have come before the committee. Next, we're going to, for the committee as a whole, we're going to go through the proposals that came from the mayor's office and that came from the clerk's office. We figured rather than submitting those to the subcommittees, that those were significant enough that we should have the entire committee hear it at once. So, with that, we're going to go to the suggested changes by the mayor's office, and Matt Kuzi is going to review with the mayor's suggestions. Excuse me, and then after that, we'll take public input. Then after that, we'll have a discussion, questions and discussion by the committee. Okay?
Good evening, Matt Kuzi, City of Omaha Law Department. If you refer to your binders and go to, I believe it's tab 6, you'll see a memorandum from Mr. Endenbosch that details the suggested charter revisions that are being proposed by Mayor Stothart's office. I've sat down on a number of occasions with the mayor, mayor's staff, Chief of Staff Tom Warren, Deputy Chief of Staff Kerry Murphy, and gone through these suggestions. What you see in the memo is an outline of the suggestions that the mayor is proposing for this charter convention. It is not the exact language of what the charter amendment would look like. That could be worked on a later date. It's simply the concept itself. And reviewing the charter, I'll go through these briefly as you have the document in front of you. With regard to the first point regarding section 2.07A, regarding the president of the council becoming the acting mayor when the mayor has left the city of Omaha. As it stands right now, the way the charter reads, in a strict constructionist form, if the mayor would go to Ralston, Council Bluffs, Lincoln, Bellevue, anywhere that, quite frankly, outside the corporate limits of the city of Omaha, technically the city council president then becomes the acting mayor. I would suggest that this charter provision was originally incorporated in there at a time before you had a miniature computer that you were able to put into your pocket. In 2022, there is now the ability for the mayor, as any other type of government official, to conduct business away from the city of Omaha. Included in that, you'll see a provision that it would be, it's not just infinite, but if the mayor would be gone for 10 days, has left the continental United States, such as going to Europe or some overseas trip, or I suppose, quite frankly, Alaska or Hawaii, then that would trigger it. The mayor is already required to notify the city clerk of an absence and to notify the council president as well. That is traditionally done already. Indicated in there, you do see some issue about signing documents or vetoing things of that measure. I will tell you that there has been numerous discussions within the city towards moving towards a DocuSign type process where documents, not just by the mayor, but other city officials, can be signed electronically. That's where you see that provision in there to remove that rather antiquated section about the mayor being simply out of Omaha and not being the mayor. With regard to the disability of the mayor, which is in section 2.07B of the charter, if you've ever read that part of the charter since you were last here, it's a very cumbersome and also very antiquated system with involving a mayor having to be examined by 3 doctors and doctors rendering opinions, things of that nature. In regard to this provision, I did turn and looked at our federal constitution to see how the disability of the President of the United States is handled, and this suggested charter language involves in there is recommended there. As it stands right now, there is no provision for a mayor to temporarily transfer power to the city council president to become the acting mayor. For example, you've all heard on TV or in the news, President so-and-so is under anesthesia and Vice President so-and-so is now in charge. We don't have that in our charter right now. In order to accomplish that, we'd have to go through this system of getting doctors to examine the mayor. Quite frankly, the language also only deals with health issues or in a situation where, quite frankly, a mayor could be deemed insane. Those types of limitations aren't really very helpful in this modern era, and it's more helpful for the mayor to have a situation where he or she could temporarily transfer power and then retrieve that power. And again, mirroring federal law, there could be a provision, again, under the 25th Amendment of the United States Constitution, whereby the cabinet could take action against a mayor, saying the majority of the cabinet feels that the mayor is incapacitated. That would then be transmitted to the council president, who would become the acting mayor, but there is a due process ability for the mayor to go before the council and attempt to regain power back. Again, these are not concepts that I or the mayor's office came up with at the top of our heads. We looked to federal law and our own constitution to gather that. Section 2.08, which is number 3, regarding basically the line of succession. Currently in city government, the only line of succession is the mayor, the council president, and the council vice president. In 2022, in the world that we live in, things can happen, terrible things can happen, whether it's by an act of a human being or by an act of God. It is possible that we could be without a substantial form of government. We all learn in grade school about there's the president, there's the vice president, there's the Speaker of the House and the Senate pro temp, and then it goes through the cabinet. This would somewhat mirror that in terms of that section as well, that there should be some sort of line of succession regarding primarily the city council, as they are elected officials. And then if you jumping ahead to section 5 in terms of a reconstitution of a government in the event of a disaster, that should something happen where the mayor and the council have died or are incapacitated. As it stands right now, I don't know who's in charge if that happens. I don't know who's in charge if the mayor's not here, the council president's not here, and the council vice president's not here, because the charter doesn't say who is in charge, and that's only 3 people. So section number 5 deals with a line of succession, and that line of succession, if it were to fall on someone, they'd still have to meet residency requirements, all the other requirements in order to be the mayor. Jumping back to number 4, which is something that you'll hear about as well in the city council presentation, things that we have learned from COVID and other possible natural disasters is the charter currently requires that the city council meet at least 2 times a month. That is required. We have encountered this problem before, and not just using COVID as an example, you can use the weather as an example. Terrible snowstorm befalls us on a Tuesday when the council is supposed to meet, and only 3 council members can get here, and they've already had no other meetings that month. Some sort of provision should be included in there where we can bypass or skip that 2 times a month meeting requirement. These constitute the request made by the mayor's office for charter amendments. I hope that the commission finds them to be reasonable, finds them to be logical, and they are very, I think, logical and reasonable suggestions to make and to amend our charter in order to have a proper and better working form of government, especially in 2022. If there are any questions, I'll obviously still be here in the room and happy to answer any of them that come up. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kuzi. Now, for the committee's edification, we're going to go through each of these individually. We'll ask for any public comment, if there is any, and then we can have the discussion. And at the end, we're not going to vote, but these will be the ideas. At the end of our term here, we'll go through all the suggestions and vote at that time. With that, the first proposal about the mayor being out of town, that's section 2.07A. Chief Warren, did you want to make any comments on this one?
Good evening, Thomas Warren, Mayor's Office, 1819 Farnham. I'm sorry, the actual provision, I don't have it in front of me.
It's allowing the mayor to go out of town.
Sure, and just to concur with Mr. Kuzi, in the absence of the mayor, how that delegation of authority in the absence and how it would then be delegated. Again, things have changed in terms of having remote capability. And of course, if there's a direct flight, her ability to return to the city of Omaha in a short period of time, oftentimes it wouldn't necessarily necessitate delegating or activating the provision of assigning these duties to the city council or the vice president. And so certainly I'll be available to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you.
Okay.
Anybody from the public to speak on this issue? Okay.
Thanks.
Committee members? Comments? Yes, this one, Mary?
There's questions.
Jenna Bonnet, I would like to ask a question. Is there a current plan for succession for the city council? And would it be appropriate to establish that to give a longer line of succession should the mayor be out of town?
You're suggesting should the mayor and council president be out of town? Have somebody else?
Should be out of town or incapacitated. The two that we have right now are the council president and the council vice president. Should the mayor be out of town, those are the two options, correct?
Correct. Mackousie City of Omaha Law Department. That is correct. Going back to number 3, I think is what you might be referring to as it stands right now. It goes the mayor, council president, and the council vice president. The charter nor any of the ordinances provide any sort of succession beyond that. Obviously, it's only proper that if there is a further line of succession, it should be elected officials before it befalls to cabinet, unelected cabinet officials to become the acting mayor. You'll note that the comments on number 3 is seniority is obviously the best way to do it. We do have a current situation where there are 3 brand new, not brand new, it's been a year, 3 new city council members whose seniority is equal. I'm sure that the law department, if the charter convention wishes to pursue this, I'm sure that the law department can come up with a line of succession for people who have a seniority tie, for lack of a better term.
Thank you.
Other comments?
I think dealing with the mayor being out of town, I think in this day and age, a mayor can be out of the city limits of Omaha, across the river, talking to the mayor there, or in Bellevue, or even be out of the state. But I guess some of the concerns would be as if, say for example, the tornado or the blizzard of 75, when you have that type of thing. The other thing is I think that there needs to be in that provision that the mayor, let's just say this, our current mayor got married. She's on vacation. She's still in the United States. She may want to delegate that authority. I think there needs to be a line in there that the mayor would be able to delegate that authority to the president of the council if he or she so chooses, because you could be active, you could be at a conference, you could take a phone call, do your regular duties, Or you may be on a vacation, and rightly so, have a family event, and you may not want to be the mayor. And there's nothing wrong with that if you are doing a vacation, and you may want to give that to the president. So how would that work there?
I would ask you to take a look at number 2. All of these suggestions somewhat interrelate with each other. If you look at request number 2, which is an amendment to section 2.07B, the title of the charter section is disability of the mayor.
Yeah, that's where I was like,
In that language, we were proposing that there would be an availability for a mayor to temporarily transfer power to the council president, or if necessary, the council vice president. So in your analogy, the mayor being away or at an event or something like that, or the tornado, let's use the tornado as an example, or some sort of 9/11 situation where flights are grounded and she couldn't get back, the mayor would be able to, by a written instrument, transfer power to the council vice president, and when the mayor was able to resume his or her duties, then revoke that assignment of power, which I believe is what goes on in our federal system between the president and the vice president. There's a written document, creating, for lack of a better term, a paper trail that would show when the temporary power was granted and when the temporary power was taken away.
yeah, and there,
If that helps with your question.
that does. I just want to make sure that's clarified, because I didn't know if that was just disability or not. So
I take, the sections are each labeled with the current language of the charter. So the current language of the charter does say president of the council dash disability of the mayor. And that's where the most logical place is to put this type of language in there. And quite frankly, you can change the titles as well.
Or just draft it within that, the mayor can temporarily relinquish based upon disability or other commitment or something like that.
Sure.
That further delays. Last piece of it is this, and for people that don't have a long memory of kind of what's gone on here over the years, I remember a time where we had a mayor that was out of town, and the council president signed, I believe, a labor agreement or something like that. And Paul knows what I'm talking about. And this has never been about partisanship or anything like that, but people do elect a mayor, people do elect a council member, and I think there's a reason why we have this, is that there's no fear that, hey, I don't like what this mayor is gonna sign or not sign, but since the mayor went to represent Nebraska on a trade mission or, you know, a council of mayors meeting or something like that, when the mayor leaves, we're gonna sign something that she normally or he wouldn't sign. That's another reason I think they need to have that in there, but I do believe that there needs to be something in there dealing with emergencies, tornadoes, things of that nature, that the president of the council can step up if necessary. And that's all I have.
And there are provisions within the code, as well as the charter, that gives the mayor, whether he or she be the acting mayor or not, the ability to impose emergency ordinances to deal with emergencies of all types.
Right.
So Kathleen Kauth, so section 2.07A really is dealing with the non-emergency. What we need to do is answer that. In a non-emergency situation, if the mayor's going to be out of the Omaha city limits for less than 10 days, can she use the amazing digital access that we have right now?
And that is our position when we drafted this recommendation, in that if the mayor has left the city, whether the mayor be in Council Bluffs or in California, that the mayor is still the mayor and is able to perform his or her duties as the mayor, whether it's be communicating via email, text, Zoom, any type of technology that is currently afforded to a mayor in order to still run the government. The only limitations that we put in there was a length of time. 10 days, I think, was a reasonable amount of time, or has left the continental United States, because there is that, as Chief Warren mentioned, you know, if the mayor is visiting her family in St. Louis, she can presumably get back here relatively quickly, whether it's by plane or, quite frankly, car. If the mayor is in another country, the ability to return to Omaha in an expedient manner is severely limited with getting flights or anything like that.
Other comments?
Oh, me too.
Mr. Reddick?
Question in regards to, as I was reading through the charter, section 3.06, filling a vacancy of the office of the mayor, it could also be that it's clearly spelled out the number of days in which power can be transferred, because that would be a vacancy. If the mayor, by proclamation or by vote of the city council, is able to transfer power to the person deemed necessary, let's say Chief, who just stepped in her case in this instance. By the way, congratulations to the mayor. on her nuptials. Then the line of succession goes the mayor's appointee, which power has been transferred to, so on and so forth down the line.
Right.
If we were to go to either disability of the mayor or section 2.08 in the mayor's suggestions that more people need to have that power transferred to, it could be the the appointed officials upon the mayor's council.
Correct.
But isn't that, my question is, does that better fall under filling a vacancy? And we spell out the vacancy 10 days, 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, versus putting a completely different section?
I also think that that's an excellent idea of something that can be changed in terms of removing that time limitation or changing the time limitation as well. I think that's a good suggestion to make, and I appreciate that you noticed that, because I'll be honest with you, I didn't. I think that's a good place to insert some additional language to deal with this situation, because, I mean, lawyers are paid to think of the worst case scenario, and the worst case scenario would be the absolute elimination of our representative form of government, no mayor, no council, and somehow it befalls on me that I'm the mayor, of which I will immediately resign. Falls on me to be the mayor, who is not elected in any way, shape, or form, appointed by the mayor, whether it was me, whether it was the HR director, or whomever it would be. And I think that's a good place to put in some sort of thing about a vacancy and what to do, because I'll tell you, in that type of situation, the first thing I'm not going to be thinking about doing if I'm the acting mayor is reconstituting the government, because something terrible has happened and I'm going to have to deal with that first. So I think that's a wonderful place to put in some additional language as well.
I think the line of succession could also include those that are running those departments that were selected by the mayor as acting city council. Then you have a balance between elected officials and appointed officials. In the worst case scenario,
Right.
we won't say what that could be,
Sure.
but in the worst case scenario, and then those are all interim positions. A new special election could be held according to the city's current charter.
Correct.
Other comments?
I have one question. Mr. Kuzi, you wouldn't, just to follow up on Ms. Bonnet's question about in the event of the mayor being out of town and the president of the city council and the vice president, you mentioned the ability for her to transfer power or something. You wouldn't be opposed to that? I mean, I think it would make sense to extend the line of succession in the event she's out of town, the president of the city council. I mean, that's probably not uncommon with as much as people travel, right? 3 people can be out of town at the same time. Extending
Correct.
that, but then not just limiting that ability for the mayor to transfer authority in a disability situation, but in a voluntary, I'm going out of the country for 15 days. So maybe
Or
putting it in both
I'm having
sections.
surgery.
Right, exactly. Okay, perfect.
Okay, I just want to make a couple comments on this one. I think it's way too broad, with all due respect. I understand if you're out of town to go down to Lincoln or to go to Papillion or Council Bluffs, perhaps a 100-mile radius would be appropriate as opposed to the continental U.S. Keep in mind, when you're flying from Omaha to the East Coast or the West Coast, you're in a plane for 3 hours. There's no cell phone service in a plane for those 3 hours. And then trying to get back from someplace outside of 100 miles might take you part of a day, it might take you a whole day before you can get back. So I think if there's an emergency situation, the mayor's not going to be able to be in this town to give directions, to be the face of the emergency, so to speak. So my thought is this is too broad. I think it should be, if you're going to be out of town, less than 24 hours and maybe 100 miles away or 200 miles away, you don't need to hand over authority to the city council president. It's my 2 cents worth. Any other comments?
I have one more comment. Worst case scenario comes to mind that in natural and national disasters, electronic communication fails. Nowadays, we see hacks all the time. And we would need, I believe, within the city charter to take on the challenge of integrating those concepts into our charter about what if there's a failure of connectivity via the electronics. So I don't have any specific recommendations. I'm not a techie person. But I do remember the days of the shared telephone lines and kids running up the street to tell the lady what they needed rather than being able to pick up the phone. So if there were a situation where we had a national disaster and the mayor was in Washington, D.C. or in some other state going to the mayor's conference and she's incommunicado suddenly, we would need something that were an emergency response, assuming that we have that long line of succession through the total length of the city council. So the last man standing with least seniority. But there has to be something that integrates the what if technology fails. Not just transportation home, but any connectivity home.
I'll add one thing on.
Sure.
That's a good point. I think maybe you can make a differentiation on what powers are given. For example, we'll go back to the Lormont Low example of signing a document when the mayor's coming back and signs it early. I think you could give the council president, vice president, or whoever's in line succession emergency powers and delineate what they can do. They can make emergency orders, emergency ordinances, tornado hits, guide civil, the civil process here with police and fire. But maybe they don't have the regular duties of the mayor unless there's something out of there. And that's my only thing. I think your point's exactly right. What if we can't get a hold of the mayor, no matter who it is, and they're on a plane and the decision has to be made? Then maybe we give emergency powers to the council president, vice president, whoever's available, but they can only do emergency actions. They can't sign a labor agreement, sign an ordinance, things of that nature that probably you hold a mayor hostage not leaving town because there's a policy disagreement.
Although now, the acting mayor, city council president can and does sign ordinances as they go through the system if the mayor's out. But I understand what he's saying. The acting mayor also can, in the past, has gone to, public events, cutting ribbons, stuff like that. So I'm just wondering, how do you delineate all of that? Right now, it's undefined.
Yeah.
It's the difference between an emergency and a non-emergency. Standard, going to an event, you certainly don't need to have the actual mayor there. But handling a tornado, yep, somebody needs to be in charge. So if there's an emergency, then it kicks in. And I think that's what you're saying, Mike, is figuring out how to delineate it and what specific roles.
Yeah, I'm trying to
are
find
able to.
balance to the force because, let's pretend the cast of characters we have now. The mayor's on her honeymoon, something happens, and we have a tornado here in Omaha. I trust Pete Festerson would do the right thing, get everybody together, police, fire, and have an action plan and have it done because that's an emergency at that time, and whoever's holding that office, I believe, would do what's best in the city. But if it's just day-to-day business of the mayor's office, and like I said, there's only a couple examples where there's ever been kind of shenanigans, but I understand why the current mayor would want that in there. I think there's some valid points to it. I just don't know that we may have to figure that over the next couple weeks. Is there a compromise in there that accomplishes some of the concerns that maybe Mayor Stothert has, but also too, the realization that if there's an on-the-ground emergency, and the city has had them, many things, the Von Mauer shooting, things happen, we have to have somebody that can respond and give direction to the civilian agencies, so.
That's true, and I think, frankly, a lot of the civilian agencies can jump in and take over, but you still need a head person, a top person there as a, face of the city, so to speak. Mr. Reddick?
My only concern would be preserving the balance of power while the mayor is out. If the city council president is automatically the next in line of succession, then you have, where does the veto power go? Where does, the question of representation of the city beyond the city council go when those ordinances are being made? And similar to our federal government, the vice president and president are rarely ever out in the same place at the same time to preserve that. So I'm going to use my own organization as an example. if I'm gone, I look at the next person in line, say, here you go, the keys are yours. And they can make whatever decisions are necessary while I'm out. However, if it comes down to removing someone from our organization, then on a grand scale or bigger decisions, then that is left to me once I get back. Now, if I'm gone, incapacitated or whatever, then that's when those line of successions come in, but there's a balance that is still there. So just, that would be my only concern with that first line of succession being the city council president. Nothing against the current city council president.
In the past, with the one exception of Lormong Low, the mayor and the council president have worked well together. And if one's going to be out of town, they notify the other one, and council president, for example, will make sure that he's in town or she's in town. So it's worked out pretty well from that standpoint. I do understand the limitation going to Papillion, Lincoln, things like that, and I think that can be rectified. So,
I agree.
any other comments?
Andrew Presti?
Yes, sir.
Is it? So I'd say two comments. I think one to Mr. Kennedy's point about delineating emergency and non-emergency powers, and to Mr. Kuzi's point on trying to think through the unimaginable, that there really is a pretty wide gap in the current structure, that even if the mayor was in the city proper but was unreachable for some reason, had, Mint Mobile and trying to cut back on the mobile bill, and we can't reach them for an hour or two and something terrible happens, there's not really a great provision in here. To Mr. Kuzi's point, I guess we have to find 3 doctors and try to figure out where the mayor is to get them there, to get the acting president to have those emergency powers. So even in the world where they're not in DC and something terrible happens, that could still happen with the current structure. So I think it is worth considering. To the point of them, whether it's a 100-mile radius or the continental United States, for me, I think it's really more of a time scenario. If there is that fallback for the emergency powers, then it is a distance scenario. I think we saw this in 2020 where the vast majority of businesses and some of the largest ones imaginable were able to operate effectively remotely, and a few of them have decided to not even go back into an in-person, in-office scenario, operating globally. So I do think that in this day and age, as long as we can figure out something for the digital provision, which really feels like the other linchpin for making this change, that there should be the ability to do something digitally for 24 or 48 hours or some shorter amount of time.
I guess the point I'm trying to make, we've had a couple situations, the Von Meyer, as Mr. Kennedy mentioned, the Wendy shooting, both those happened obviously very quickly, and people had to get on the scene very quickly, and he needed some leadership in a very short period of time. Now, you say that might not happen again, but I guarantee you there'll be something like that at some point in time. So, again, my thoughts, I don't know if we want to do motions now, if we should wait till the end when we get to
I
all
guess
these other
my question,
issues.
Chairman Kratz, would be, to your point, that will happen again. Hopefully not the shootings, but something will happen again that needs to be responded to immediately. So my question is for anyone more knowledgeable on the current process. If that were to happen and Chief Warren calls the mayor and she isn't able to pick up for some reason, what happens? Are we waiting until she calls back if we know she's in the city?
Mackesy Law Department, I think in that situation, if she was in the city and she wasn't answering her phone, and I mean multiple times, I think an effort would be made by the mayor's office to locate her. Also remember, during the work days, the mayor is also routinely accompanied by security. So there's usually, the mayor, when she's doing her official duties and official business, is usually, I'd be willing to say always, accompanied by somebody else, whether it's her security, Chief Warren, a member of her staff, something like that. So she would be located. Middle of the night, different story. We can't reach the mayor. We might send out the police or someone from the mayor's security detail to go and check on the mayor to see what the status is, because, again, something, maybe she had a heart attack, stroke, fell down, something like that. But an effort would be made, again, to communicate with other people who have frequent contact with the mayor. To Chairman Kratz's point about a vote, my suggestion, if I may offer one, would be if there's not necessarily, it sounds like there's some other ideas, amendments, or tweaks that could be made to these suggestions that, I don't know if you want to send this to a subcommittee or whatever you want to do, Mr. Kratz, that those ideas or the consensus of those ideas be funneled to the law department so that we can craft an appropriate document for you to review and eventually vote on.
I think that's correct. I don't think we need to send this to the subcommittee, but as committee members, if you have suggestions, amendments, send them to the law department. They need to put together some language in any event, so we'll do that. Okay, we'll move on to the second item.
I have just one.
Yes,
one
ma'am.
point of question. Was that, when you say the subcommittee, which subcommittee would this go to? Should we hand it over to a subcommittee?
Oh, I gotta look at the subcommittees. It would be the administration, mayor's office.
I was actually gonna, I mean, what else is there for that subcommittee to do if this doesn't go for sort of further?
It'll depend on
Review.
any public comments or suggestions, which there may be none.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't be opposed to having that subcommittee just hash out some of the ideas that were brought up, get maybe a couple of different 3 ideas for the full, committee, for the full convention to, not to make the ultimate decision, not even to make the ultimate recommendation, but maybe to get 2 or 3 sussed out to bring back to the group. I mean, it's up to the law department too, how many, folks they want to gather ideas from, but.
And I think the subcommittees can be flexible, and certainly, we're not voting on this today and won't for some time. As the subcommittees meet, so I have no problem with the subcommittee taking this issue up again. Okay?
I think there's enough here with the mayor's suggestions and what the comments that have been made from this committee to have, I hate to use this term, but kind of a war games discussion about if this, then what? Speaking from personal experience, and you brought up a great point, Chairman Kratz, that the people on the ground are going to be mobilized very quickly when these type of situations happen. And if we trust our elected officials to put the right people in place, I think having a line of succession that lends to that power, whether we have technology available or not, would help protect that. It would help protect our government. I was in Von Mar, and I got a text message that the gentleman now representing the mayor while she is out, Chief Warren, who was chief at the time, was there. I've never felt more safe in my life. So if we do play a war game scenario where we kind of do worst case and work with the law department, I think the current charter allows for us to insert some things, or at least make, recommendations to the overall committee that then could be open to the public and voted on if necessary.
Just a little aside and a comment. I remember way back when Al Haig was in the White House and there's an incident and Al Haig said, I'm in charge here.
He wasn't in the right line of succession.
That's
No.
right.
No, he wasn't.
He might have been chief of staff at the time, I don't recall.
Mhm.
In any event, let's go on to number 2. We've kind of discussed that a little bit. That's the disability of the mayor. Again, does the law department or Chief Warren want to speak to that at this point? Okay.
Maccusy Law Department, I don't have any more comments to make, and on behalf of Chief Warren, he doesn't have any further comments to make. We're simply here to answer any questions the Charter Convention has.
Anybody from the public desiring to speak on this issue? Committee members? Yes, yes. Howard?
The recommendation says it should be either entirely removed or another section created. The disability of the mayor, when it goes into the 3 medical doctors and so forth, I think that was recommended that it should be removed.
Yes, that's the way I understand it.
It seems like there ought to be a little more factual medical background other than just 3 people on the committee.
I would tend to agree,
Alleging that the mayor's disabled.
which would have happened in some years past.
Right.
But I will say, I looked at this section way back when. It's difficult to figure it out. But I would agree with you. There ought to be some medical evidence. I think it ought to be rewritten to make it clearer.
Yeah, it's grand when they voluntarily say I'm disabled and turn the power over.
It's not going to happen.
No.
Other comments?
Janet Lynette, I just want to say that when, in recent history, as in within the last few years, we've read a lot about, well, it's not in that document, so we can do whatever we want. It's not stated specifically. So I think we do need, in this case, when we're talking about the head of our city, we need to be very specific in how we write it, and we need to consider all of the worst-case scenarios, no matter how it is. And if 3 doctors makes it a clearer decision, then 3 doctors it should remain. But we can't just assume that we're all good people out there who might someday be in power within the next 10 years, that what we decide on this convention will rule. So I think we need to look farther ahead than that and be very specific.
I agree with you. And one other example I should mention is when Mayor Suttle was in Ireland, he had a heart attack, and pretty serious heart attack at that time, as I understand. So yeah, we need to be specific on how to remove a mayor if that's going to happen. Other comments? Okay,
Just for clarification, so this, I think is this request that we remove the 3-doctor and put and insert a majority of the cabinet believes that the mayor is disabled? So it's getting, I guess that's a question for Mr. Kuzi.
Matt Kuzi Law Department, that is the request, is to remove that section as Mr. Kratz indicated in reading that charter provision. It is very cumbersome and wordy, and you can read it 50 times and not necessarily understand it. Trust me, I've tried. That it was also written before things like HIPAA and medical privacy and things like that. So the request is, yes, to remove that with this doctor scenario situation. And it's doctors that I believe they're doctors, and Mr. Kratz can correct me if I'm wrong. I believe it's doctors that are appointed by the council to examine the mayor. I mean, I can only imagine how long that this process would take in order to finally get to where the doctors are actually examining the mayor. So the request would be to eliminate that and change it to a system that mirrors our own federal law, where it could be then the majority of the cabinet feels that the mayor is incapacitated or disabled, would sign a document indicating so, and then transmit that decision to the city council.
Matt, real quick, Kathleen Gouth, how many people are, how many cabinet members are there?
I
So a
knew that was
majority
gonna
would be,
13 maybe? I don't know.
I think 11. I have to count by where everybody sits.
so you're looking at getting either 5 or 7 people to
Right.
state.
And the cabinet, it's, for example, I'm in the cabinet. The police chief is, the fire chief, planning director, public works. Someone can count as I'm rattling these off. Public works, human rights and relations.
I can help you, Matt. I've got the list right here.
I think it's about,
Yeah.
I do know this, I think it's an odd number,
Okay.
which
One.
helps.
By the way, most of whom have been appointed by the mayor.
That is correct. Only the police chief, the fire chief, and myself are not, are in the civil service.
And that's found on page 17 of the charter, it looks like, section 3.07. I think.
Other comments? Okay, we'll
I
move on to
do.
the next one.
Chairman Kratz,
Yes.
I would, for the record, state that I do think providing something, maybe to Mr. Reddick's point of putting it into the vacancy section instead of section 2.07, but some way to temporarily transfer that power of the mayor in writing, short of Currently, it seems right now the only way that the mayor could do that is by heading to Ralston for an afternoon to have something done. So some way to temporarily transfer that would be good in a separate, less confusing section.
Okay, I'll let the law department draft something on that. Okay, the next section, suggestion, number 3, section 2.08, line of succession. Again, we've talked a little bit about that already. Comments from the administration? Comments from the public? Comments from the committee?
Morgan here. I do have a question. My question would be, what does that mean?
Can I have your attention,
I guess we're done.
We'll be doing routine testing of the fire system this evening. Please disregard any alarms. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Morgan, you want to proceed?
Well, that just threw me off. but- So I was asking on the process concerning the metrics that will be used to determine seniority, if there's an even playing field among council members. If you could explain a little bit about more how that process works.
Matt Kuzi, Law Department. I will be honest, we have talked about this and we have thought about this, not just in the mayor's office, but in the council's office as well. Again, seniority is an obvious benefit and an obvious system, but we do have 3 city council members who have equal seniority. I was not exactly able to come up with a great idea. It could be alphabetical, by last name, something like that, but there would have to be some sort of mechanism in place so that if we got to a system where it was the newest 3 who are not more senior than, and they're all equal in seniority, all sworn in at the same time, all elected on the same date, that some system would have to be in place. If it was alphabetical, I just didn't include anything in there because I don't necessarily have a great idea. You can say alphabetical, but somebody on this commission might have a better idea than that.
Things where the voters made a decision. You could either do one because we apportion based upon population, roughly 7 equal districts. You can say for the person that had either the highest number of votes, highest vote margin, or by a percentage, you could do something like that. Because if you have a principle that you want to have an elected person, I guess the person that had more votes, and I'm not saying that's the only way to do it, but I think going by a letter of the last name, you probably want to have something there.
Again, I admitted that it's not the best idea.
Yeah.
However, to your point, as the charter indicates, it is the city attorney's job to notify the next person in the line of succession. And if I'm in a situation where, at this point, 4 council members and the mayor are not available, there's something going on, and I don't want to have to be in a position where I have to get the election commissioner or the secretary of state on the phone to tell me how many more who got the most votes out of these last 3, so I can go and hopefully find this person and tell them, hey, congratulations, you're the acting mayor. And I get it in terms of the vote total, but there also has to be a level of expediency to it, I think, in that type of situation, because it's my job to notify that person, and you don't want to have that kind of level of delay.
Kathleen Kauth, when they determine who is the president and who is the vice president of the city council, would that be an appropriate time for them to figure out their own line of succession through vote, or however the president and vice president are determined?
Matt Kuzi, Law Department, that's certainly a suggestion, to leave that up to the council to determine what seniority means to them in terms of, and how to break the tie of a seniority. That could be a way to let the 7 of them decide what that means and how that would work.
Other comments?
I like that idea, letting the council decide. And if that should fail, it would just simply be when they elect the president and the vice president of the council that they draw straws. And it's a lottery, basically, of who's the next in line. Make it as uncomplicated as possible and unprejudiced as possible.
I guess I'd leave it up to the law department to, you can draft up these changes, and maybe you can have several alternatives, and then we'll vote on those at the end of the day. Not today, but at the
Right.
end of.
I know what you meant by
Yeah.
not today.
Okay, let's move on to the next section. Section 2.10, council meeting quorums. And the provisions there for emergencies. Any discussion from the administration? From the public? From the committee?
Kathleen Kauth. So rather than skipping, is that when we should be implementing technology? If the weather's bad and we can't drive there, or if something's happened, rather than skipping an actual meeting?
Before you go on, Mr. Kuzi.
I already know what you're going to say.
Yeah. You got state law that limits what he can do by
By-
Zoom or
Got it. Okay.
by things like that, and we're pretty much bound by
Held
that.
to the state law. Okay, thank you.
Is that the correct answer?
I agree with Mr. Kratz.
Anything else from the committee? Okay.
What's the alternative, Janet Lynette, what's the alternative then if they can't meet at least 2 times in a month? And
I'd
is that month a calendar month, or is it a 4-week period?
It's a calendar month, and I would say you do it at the next available meeting, next available opportunity. You get the streets plowed, and then you can meet after 24-hour notice after that,
Okay.
for example.
And I think it's worth remembering, not that we want to remember back to the pandemic, but the governor did put in, instituted the emergency measures to allow city councils and whatnot to meet. Maybe he did it too little, too much, we can argue about that, but
Without
for a
authority.
pandemic at least, that the emergency keeps going on and on, I think we will have direction from that same state law that governs the fact that we can't do it.
Well, when that happened, there were some disagreements between state officials, city and county officials on what he could or could not do, but it worked out. Anything else on this issue? Next one, the final one from the administration, is reconstruction of government in event of disaster. It's 8.13. Can comments from the administration? Public? Committee?
I think it's something we have to have that kind of in place. I think, unfortunately, all too often we've seen major disasters or tragic events that happen where people in a room, they're unfortunately not able to serve anymore. So I think that's kind of important to have that, and I think the best way to have that is get that line of succession put together and have that reconstitution provision. I know the state already has a law dealing with smaller cities, don't they, on if they fall below a quorum or something like that, there's a replacement process?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I simply don't know.
But I don't think it doesn't apply to us because we have the charter, so.
And maybe this ties in with the line of succession.
Yeah,
Both probably would be the same.
I think you'd have that, because then you'd have like whatever the cabinet, and then, I know we have that process, I remember when Bernie Simon passed, we had that process of the acting mayor that's in the charter, and then with the council votes then on the mayor, what was that title for that mayor? You had the acting mayor, and then the
It was acting mayor, and then the vice.
temporary mayor, I forget
Yeah.
how they call that mayor, I guess he's the mayor, or she's the mayor, after the council votes on the replacement of the acting mayor, and then you have a special election in a period of time.
At some point, yeah.
Yeah, probably have those kind of tied in together.
I would think so.
Yeah.
Again, we'll await drafting from the law department.
Question on what is the actual number for a quorum with the council members?
4.
4. So the example was given that if only 3 or 4 can make it to that meeting, obviously they don't have a quorum unless they have 4. But if the provision is that a quorum is met, at least a vote is passed to push that meeting until the next available date, so that we're still having a meeting, we're still meeting what the city charter says. However, all agenda items have been pushed to the next meeting.
That's how I would envision it, yes.
But that's not how the provision is currently written in the charter.
I think the council can set a meeting at any time it wants. It's not bound by every Tuesday. It's not bound by 4 times a week, or 4 times a month, I'm sorry, but just twice a month. And again, they can set, I believe, the time and date that they want to.
Okay.
Another requirement is it has to be held in this building. Mr. Kuzi?
That's correct. The council has the ability right now to call a special session to meet. There's some notice requirements and things of that nature, but they currently possess the ability to meet. So if they couldn't meet, well, not meeting next Tuesday, but if they couldn't meet next Tuesday for whatever reason, if a quorum of them agreed to have it on another date after sufficient posting and notice, they could do that.
But the question was about, correct me if I'm wrong, state law does not allow for them to not meet, correct? We have to meet at least, or not meet, they have to meet at least twice a month.
Charter requires.
The charter requires that.
Yes.
So you were saying that state law does not allow for certain things to be done over Zoom, over,
That's correct, electronically.
okay.
And
Can
the
that
difference
be
between
the
having
one?
the meeting,
Mhm.
like, a council member could appear via Zoom and see what's going on. A council member could not vote via Zoom under the current readings of statutes.
Okay. Okay.
And attending and voting are two different things.
I heard one thing that got brought up, so if all city council meetings have to happen in this building,
That's my understanding.
okay, let me ask you this hypothetical. What if we had a tornado or a fire? Then in the charter, where do we go for a council meeting? Is there
I
some
suggest
provision-
maybe what's ever left of the building, frankly.
But that's not by state law, that's by charter.
So then we need a succession plan for the building as well.
I think we should, I think the council should have some type of ability in case of emergency to be able to
To meet
select another
somewhere
site.
else.
That may be something we want to look on if the rest of the board wants to do that, because that concerns me, because we have had a history of problems with buildings, they've been leveled by a tornado or something else happens to them, so.
Well, and lawyers are creative by nature. I think I could probably make the argument, or let's say something happened to this building, but the courthouse is still standing. I'm like, well, they're connected, so we can go over to the courthouse and do it. I'm sure Mr. Kratz would shake his head, but I think I could reasonably make that argument that if something happened to this building, we can go over to the courthouse since it's connected. As well, you could probably make an argument too about other city buildings being suitable places to have it as well.
So for example, the Millard School Board, we usually have them at the Don Stroh Building. That's our administrative building. Right now, we're replacing the air conditioning and redoing everything. So our meetings this summer at Millard North, and that's just by operation of posting the agenda and all that. And the library board, we move them around. So I think maybe we want to give the council the ability to set alternative sites in case of an emergency. So that's my 2 cents.
Mr. Kratz, I see where in the charter where the first swearing in has to be at City Hall, but I'm not seeing that the meetings have, but it's probably in here. You can tell me after the meeting where it is.
Yeah,
In that section
I think it is.
2.10.
It's always been done that way.
Yeah.
Anyway,
And-
the swearing in does have to be here. I think we've taken that to mean the meetings have to be here also.
Okay. Yeah, because it says all regular, shall be open to the public. Yeah, well, we can figure that out as we read through it.
Anything else on this one? Then let's go to the,
Press I.
Yes, sir.
One thing I thought of belatedly on section 2.10 is one potential option for the subcommittee or the law department to consider would be, instead of having it be 2 meetings a month, be 6 meetings quarterly or 24 meetings within the year. Something of that nature to give more flexibility without having to get too crazy with special provisions or other things of that nature. Obviously, we're going well above and beyond the charter already and have been for some amount of time. So I'm sure it could be used for gamesmanship, but that could give some additional flexibility.
okay, I will, I guess, comment based on experience. There's so much business going on in this city, so many things that have to come before the council. If he did not have 4 meetings in a month, you'd have meetings that would go on for 5 or 6 hours. It's just, believe it or not, there's a lot of business for the council.
And I was just referring to giving flexibility in times of emergency or other issues like that, where having it twice in 1 month would be an issue, but they need to have 6 the next month to make up for all of that missed business that needs to be there. They would still easily fit that 24 or 6 quarterly meetings or whatever it would be.
Okay, other comments? Let's go on to number 6 on the agenda, which are the city council recommendations. There, Mr. Wiesen.
Good evening. My name is Ryan Wiesen. I'm an assistant city attorney with the City of Omaha Law Department. I've been asked to give you a brief overview of the proposed charter changes that have been submitted by the City Council's office. They can be found under tab 7 of your binders, and I'll just briefly go over each one. Most of these proposed changes, in addition, are changes that are already unenforceable in our charter because they conflict with provisions of state statute and are therefore preempted. The first provision pertains to Charter Section 2.02, and it deals with a residency requirement for members of the City Council. Our charter currently states that at the time of filing for office, every candidate for City Council has to be a resident of that district in the city for a period of 1 year. However, state statute, Nebraska Revised Statute Section 32-501, states that no person shall be required to be a resident for any period of longer than 6 months in order to be eligible to be a candidate for office. So this section, this 1-year requirement, isn't enforceable under our provision as it is, and state statute says that the length of time can be no longer than 6 months. The second suggestion from the City Council's office details Section 2.06 within the charter, and it has to do with filling council vacancies. And this provision has been proposed to be changed due to some controversy that recently happened when a City Council member resigned and then was still able to vote on that council member's replacement, generating substantial negative feedback from members of the public. And that's essentially just the gist of that. The change would state affirmatively that any council member who is leaving office is prohibited from voting upon that council member's replacement, and it would be up to the remaining 6 members of the council to select that replacement. Section 2.10 is the next provision that has been suggested to be changed from the City Council's office, and the convention has pretty much already discussed this. It is a requirement to state that the council is required to schedule 2 meetings per month rather than an affirmative requirement to meet a certain number of times per month in order to deal with things like pandemics or natural disasters, civil unrest, things of that nature. The next provision of the city charter that has been proposed to be revised details Section 2.15 regarding city franchises. As the charter is currently written, there is a requirement that before any franchise can be issued, that it has to be submitted to a vote of the public to approve that franchise. However, this is, again, a section that is preempted by state statute and is unenforceable. Nebraska Revised Statute 18-22-02 states that the governing bodies of municipalities are authorized to grant such franchises and that such franchises are effective and binding without submission to the general public. Additionally, there was a franchise within the City of Omaha that was granted to Cox Cable way back in the late 70s or early 80s that was submitted, that was granted without submission to a vote of the people, and that was challenged through a court case. The Nebraska Supreme Court ruled in 1982 that this statute preempted the city charter provision and the franchise was valid without being approved by the voters. And so this is a section that hasn't been enforceable for at least 40 years at this point. The final provision that has been suggested to be changed is Section 3.02, dealing with qualifications for the mayor. Just like the first suggested change detailing qualifications for members of the council, the charter requires that the mayor be a resident for, I believe, a period of 5 years. However, that same state statute provision requires that the residency period can be no longer than 6 months. And so it's just a requested change to harmonize provisions of our charter with state statute, which already control and preempt these provisions. And with that, I'll be available to answer any questions that the convention may have.
Thank you, Mr. Wiesen. Let's go through these particular sections. First one is it's number 6A on the agenda. It's Charter Section 2.02 on the 6-month residency. Any discussion? It's a matter of law, so I don't think there's much we can do with that, and it should be changed. Okay, the second. Yes,
I'm
ma'am?
sorry, Janet Bonnet, I have to say something. In the times that we live right now, a 6-month only residency for anyone who wants to be a candidate in any office means that a local government can easily be taken over by people who do not know us, are not aware of what our vision is for our own places of business and life. And I'm very disappointed to know that the state statute overrides what would be normally a simple question of ethical behavior. 6 months is insufficient for a person to learn enough about a locality, let alone the people, and then run for be a candidate for office. And I think that needed to be on the record.
I appreciate that, and certainly my time with the city, I've looked at this issue a number of times, and 6 months is pretty short, but you got a state statute and you have some federal cases that pretty much tie our hands. Yes.
Question, can the Charter Commission or the City Council make a recommendation to state legislation to change that? Not that it would do a whole lot, but is that something that can be done?
Guess we could make that recommendation. Usually the way it works, it'll go through the mayor's office and the city council to present the agenda for the city, and that could be added if so desired. Other comments? Okay, let's move on to the next section, fill-in council vacancies. And yes, that did create some issues last time. I should back up. Any public comments on filling vacancies? Okay, comments from the committee? Rich Pauls voted for his successor.
Okay. It was a 5-2 vote, wasn't it?
Might have been 4-3. Yeah, I think his vote made the difference, as I recall.
Cal, what would have happened had he not been allowed to vote and it was 3-3? Who would break that tie?
You wouldn't, you'd just keep voting.
Oh, okay, got it.
Yeah, and maybe at some point you decide to select somebody else if you can't get a quorum or majority. But yeah, you just keep the vote going, which happens in some organizations. Other comments? Okay. Let's move on to the third one, section 2.10, quorum for the council meetings in bad weather. We've kind of discussed this already, but any public comment? Council, committee?
So how much would they take that down to on the bad weather then? How does that change that?
Well, you're required to have two. Quorum, let's see. Mr.
Brian
Reason,
Weason,
do you want to
Assistant City
comment?
Attorney. I didn't quite catch the question.
Yeah, so then the change becomes what then on the quorum?
It's not a change to the quorum, it's a change to the section that's titled Council Meetings Quorum. Essentially, the proposed language that has been submitted to the mayor is to add that the council shall be scheduled to meet regularly, and rather than it has to meet regularly, it has to meet a minimum of 2 times. So that if there are 2 times that it's scheduled, but say there's a snowstorm or a tornado on one of those dates, and then civil unrest or a pandemic on the second date, that there wouldn't have to be some sort of emergency or short notice meeting on the last 2 days of the month in order to make up for those because they were scheduled.
Okay.
Other comments? Okay. Let's go on to the next section, section 2.15, franchises. Comments from the public? Committee? One thing I want to mention, I don't know if I should or not, but way back when with the Cox franchise, before my time, I remember Cox, and the city council voted for it, found out later that some of the city council members had stock in Cox. So I think the reason to have the public vote for it is to prevent some type of corruption, but apparently we can't do that now with state law, so it is what it is.
Reddick here. Can there be something added to, before a vote by the city council, any conflict of interest on a proposed franchise be added to the agenda. That way, at least the council members and the city are aware of the potential conflict of interest.
Yeah, we could add that. Mr. Reason, do you have any comments?
Ryan Weeson, Assistant City Attorney, that's certainly something that we can look at, adding language that can clarify that. There are also already provisions of the charter that prohibit conflict of interest of elected officials or city employees in contracts that are approved by the city. I suppose a franchise agreement is a type of contract stating that if there is that vote and that conflict of interest or that financial interest is discovered later on, that contract, that agreement is then voidable by the mayor and the council at that time, and the council member who voted for it could potentially lose their office for doing that.
The only reason I pose it up front is because, let's take Cox Cable as a example. The investment of infrastructure, usually by those types of franchises or organizations, as well as what the city would then invest to have them come in, could create financial and public implications that it's too, you know, the what's the term? The glue is already out of the toothpaste is already out of tube. We can't do anything about it at that point, and we don't want to put our city in financial strait or challenge any other part of our government based on that. It could create the same backlash as having someone vote when they shouldn't. So just something to think about up front.
Could you, Janet Bonnet, could you give us another example of a type of franchise besides telecommunications like Cox? Weren't the concessions that were given to a specialty company for 25 years to run the beverage and food supply at the what's called the CHI now, were those also franchises? There was a lot of money involved there.
Ryan Weeson, Assistant City Attorney. To the best of my knowledge, the only franchise agreements that the city currently has in place are or is with Cox Communications for cable services. I believe there used to be a franchise agreement with CenturyLink for cable services as well, but that has recently been terminated. Normally, there are other types of franchises, might include franchises for water service or electric service, utilities, those types of quasi-public or public infrastructure and services. I believe Mr. Indenbosch submitted a memo to every one of the convention members explaining some of that as well. And again, to the best of my knowledge right now, the only franchise agreement that the city has in place is with Cox Cable for cable services.
And
So-
Ms. Bodett, let me respond also that what you're talking about is a contract that Mecca has with respect to the civic, or to the Arena Convention Center, and it's not a city contract.
Okay.
Other comments? Okay. Going on to the last issue here, 3.02, qualifications of the mayor for the office. And again, we still run into the 6-month residency issue. Public comment? Committee comments?
I do have a comment on 210 if there's no one that has a comment on 302.
Okay.
So not to backtrack too much, but as I was rereading and scrolling through this, with the Schedule 2 language, is there anything that requires that, trying to think through the worst case imaginable, right? Back to the earlier conversation, that they wouldn't just allow the council to schedule those meetings but not actually host them? Is there any language saying that gets around that current requirement if there is some public disaster, natural disaster, or whatever state of emergency that's been declared?
Ryan Weeson, Assistant City Attorney. The language that has been proposed, again, is the addition is underlined in the memo, and it does say just shall be scheduled to meet. So I'm not quite sure I understand completely your question, but this would require the council to schedule at least 2 meetings each month, and there would have to be a reason, either a lack of a quorum or some sort of emergency or natural disaster, civil unrest, something of that nature, why the council could not meet at that time.
So I guess, back to, because I guess we're just playing worst case scenario planning here. If you had 4 members of the council that just did not want to meet to vote on whatever, and they just refused to show to any of the meetings, what would happen in this scenario with this new language?
Ryan Wiesen, Assistant City Attorney. Whether there was a scenario with this language or as the charter provision is currently written, if 4 of the 7 members of the City Council refuse to show at the meeting for a quorum, no meeting could be held. There are additional provisions of the charter, I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, that allow for the removal of council members in the event that they are absent for a certain period of time. So if that were to be the case, if 4 members just refused to come and they met that certain time limitation, I think it's, off the top of my head, it's 6 months, but I don't know that for sure, then they could be removed from office and new council members could be selected.
Texas legislature, when they needed a quorum or a vote, they kind of went to DC or something like that. So, I mean, I don't think we've ever had that.
We also did have an issue with Chuck Segerson when he had his stroke, heart attack, and I forgot to, I thought maybe it was 3 months or something like that, but we were facing that issue at that point,
Right.
so. Other comments? Yes, sir.
Tim Pendrell. For 3.02 and then the other one on the council, changing it to 6 months, could we just make it like as prescribed by state so that if the state did change it, we wouldn't have to change it in the charter again?
I mean, we could do something like that, I think. I can't imagine the state making it any less than 6 months, or any court saying it should be less than 6 months.
It could go more, but I was just thinking if we put it as a recommendation and then in January it switches to a year and now we have it 6 months in the charter for a decade.
Keep in mind also that the council can change, council can put any changes to the charter to public vote at any time. Doesn't have to do it every 10 years.
Right.
They've generally chosen not to in the past, but they can.
Yeah.
Okay, other questions? We're at the end of our agenda. Next meeting's June 2nd. Do we have other business to discuss at this point? If not, do I hear a motion to adjourn?
Open it up for any other.
Thank you. Yes, I should have.
No problem.
Okay, and as part of other business, any public comment?
My name's Wes Dodge, and I live at 175th and T. I work at 114th and Center. I'm on the board of directors of Common Cause Nebraska. I'm associated with Represent Us and Rank the Vote Nebraska. And there's just 3 things I'd like you all to consider when you're looking at what you're going to do here. One is, of course, I'd like you to look at ranked choice voting. From what I've heard here, it sounds like maybe we have to have the state approve of that at some point. There is pending legislation to allow cities, I can't remember the classes, but the larger class cities to make those designations if they choose to. I think it would be good if we had some language that said tentatively if we had that option that we should be able to enact that as soon as possible. The other one that I wanted to address was dark money issues, which you've kind of gotten into a little bit, which is Alaska recently has done a petition that actually enacted their ranked choice voting, but along with it was if anybody is receiving donations from people, they should report it within 48 hours. We have a big problem here in Nebraska. You've all gotten the postcards, the crazy postcards with, people are baby killers and stuff like that 2 weeks before an election. The way our reporting is right now, that people don't have to disclose that. If we can adopt something, or if it's available to the city to do that, I would like to see that. Also, you broached it here a little bit, but the disclosure of conflicts or potential conflicts. I don't know if it's an overreach, but my wife works in finance, and anybody in our family and her herself. I mean, we have to disclose everything we have for SEC evaluation. I'd like to think that, you know, with the city council members, you could just have people take a look at that, and then we could know there's a potential conflict beforehand. And then the last thing is the mayor had mentioned it when she came up and talked to you about city elections being in conjunction with our more significant, I don't want to say more significant, but you know what I mean, the gubernatorial or the presidential elections. I've actually been talked to by a couple people that are associated with the election commission, you know, kind of peripherally, and they've said that would be a more democratic situation for us. If you look back at the election turnouts, city primary elections have been as low as like, I hate to inaccurately quote it, but you can see it on the website. It's like 18%, 18 to 20%. We are lucky to get a 33% turnout for the final elections on city elections. If you pair those together with a gubernatorial election or a presidential election, we had a recent presidential election with 74% turnout here, and the gubernatorial ones tend to hit over 50. So that would also be a good money saver if, you know, I don't want to be misquoted on this because I don't know the numbers exactly, but in the past, some of the mayoral candidates were saying that an election costs somewhere between $300,000 and $500,000. Maybe some of the city attorneys know the numbers on that. But if you can eliminate those elections, you save the city potentially $500,000 by doing that. You also accomplish that with ranked choice voting if we do that, because you don't have to have runoffs and you can do away with some of the primaries. So when you look at the various things that you're going to look into, I'm hoping you'll look at those things.
Thank you, Mr. Dodge. Any questions from the committee? Before you go on, I think we will put your suggestions to one or several subcommittees that are appropriate, and there can be further discussion with the subcommittees. Yes, sir.
Tim Pedrogan, I just wanted to throw out one kind of thing on top of that is having the elections in the city in 2001, 11, 21, especially this year with the redistricting and the census being delayed, we're getting every 10 years pretty much an unrepresentative election happening by having it essentially before the census is done and before the redistricting is done. So yeah, and then middle of the decade we redistrict for the cities and the city elections, and then you go to the next one. So that one of the reasons where I see that as being more key, being able to potentially at least nudge the state if they were to allow it to move it to the November elections, would be it would give the city and the election commission the time to actually reapportion the districts based on the population changes that have been quite drastic in Omaha over the course of 20 years, but really every decade it's changing quite a bit.
And we'll have the subcommittee look at that. I might also add, along with that, you got to figure out what are you going to do with the current office holders. Do they get short 2 years, or do they get another 2 years? But the subcommittee can look at that.
I think that problem run into is this, and this is just not generally this, but anything that's in conflict with current state law, we're making proposals for things to change that the state legislature or governor won't approve. I think our time is probably best served by things that we can actually get through that are legal, and I'm not the gatekeeper on that. I'll get advice from the city attorney's office on what is, as we get these through, is what we can change and not change. But here's the other mechanism of this too, is the city council and the mayor have the ability to change charter as well too. So if and when the law does change across the state, a city council and a mayor can always make those changes. And I think that's one of the things to look at there as well. My last point of this is dealing with the elections for the city. This is just my personal view. It doesn't come from the right or the left or anything like that, is this. After seeing this last governor's race, of it dominating the media and all that, and the legislative races, and then you look back to the presidential cycle and look at that, the one thing I do appreciate about our city council in the mayor's race is this. You have the ability of those people to go out and politic. The focus is just on 2 people you vote for if you live in legislative district 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, whatever it is, to focus on those issues. And you focus on the mayor and you focus on your council member. And there's something to be said about that, because I think in this last election, as you go down through the long ballot, picking school board members, community college board members, MUD, OPPD, I don't want to go on, I could be here forever, bond issues, I think something gets lost in that. And I think because of the money that has to get spent to get your message out, because you have to fight through all that traffic of who's the better governor, who's endorsed him and all that, you kind of lose sight of what you're trying to vote for. And I think voters get a fatigue. I'll tell you this, I was fatigued after that primary. So that's just something for us to think about, listen to the community. And I think you make, Wes, you make some good points there about that. Those are things to look at. But that's the one thing I always worry about is people need to focus on that particular office, because whoever the mayor of your city council is, that's a big deal for the long term of the city, because politics is local, not national.
Can I respond to 2 of those things very quickly?
Well, I was just gonna answer, 'cause Mr.
Okay,
Kennedy
go
asked
ahead.
me a question.
Okay.
Sorry. Matt Kuzi, Law Department. In response to your question, Mr. Kennedy, it would be the position of the Law Department, and this is not taking away from any citizens' ideas, but the manner of which the votes are taken, whether it's ranked choice voting or the current system that's a matter for the legislature with regard to moving the city elections, until the legislature changes the statute, it is not going to be possible for us to change the current election style for city elections. So until the legislature changes the statute, I don't recall it off the top of my head, but the state legislature is the one who set out the date for the elections and created this odd number year where we have city elections after a presidential election. So since Mr. Kennedy asked me to opine on 2 of those matters, I felt it best to come down and do so. Thank you.
Mr. Dodge, you had something further you wanted to say?
Yeah, just one little bit of input after that, and I don't disagree with Mr. Kuzi on what he said. I mean, that's the way our system works right now. But as far as ranked choice voting, like right now in Utah, I think 23 cities use it, but the state doesn't. I think if this got some attention, it's not something that people know a lot about. New York City used it this last time around. But no matter what side of the spectrum you're on, if you're on the right or the left, over 80% of the people and 85% of the people in New York liked it. So if the city just says we would like that as an option, or we want it to be exercised as an option as soon as the state would say it's okay, I think that would kind of send the message out there that it's a very positive option. To your second statement about the city council being separate from the rest, our ballot's already pretty thick this last time around. I enjoy voting at home because I get on my computer and I look at everybody and I study the things out. I think you have the opportunity to do that. This would be one more person that you're voting on. I mean, you're just voting on one city council seat. Maybe there's 3 or 4 people that are running, but you could research them and you could do that one extra little bit of work. And I think it would be more of a priority than, I don't want to insult anyone, but like I'll say dog catcher because we didn't have that on the ballot, but you know what I mean. So,
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you
Dodge.
very much.
Any other public comments? Will you please state your name and address?
Yeah, my name is Alex O'Hanlon, 3902 Davenport Street. I'm here today on behalf of One Omaha. One Omaha is a nonprofit organization that empowers people where they live through education, training, and engagement to develop thriving neighborhoods. We've been working with neighborhood and community groups for 6 years, and over this time, we've built trusting two-way relationships. I'm here today to make recommendations for amendments to the Home Rule Charter from this perspective. Our suggestions include recommendations that will lead to better representation of residents in city departments, a more modern and dynamic city layout, and increased trust in city government due to better resident engagement. Our recommendations are as follows. Firstly, Our suggestion, firstly, to provide for better representation of Omaha residents, we recommend amending the charter to prevent any heads of city departments from holding public office in another jurisdiction. Department heads make decisions that affect Omaha residents, and the best way to ensure that Omaha residents benefit from top-level decisions is to have top-level decision makers have only one priority and have that priority be Omaha residents. Furthermore, city department heads, to have a city department head hold a position of power in Omaha while simultaneously holding a position of power in another jurisdiction that has differing priorities from the city of Omaha in negotiations creates a direct conflict of interest. By updating the charter to prevent heads of departments from holding office in other jurisdictions, we can avoid this problem. Secondly, to aid in the development and redevelopment of Omaha as a modern and dynamic city, we recommend amending the charter to require that the master plan be updated every 10 years, much like you all are currently updating the charter. Our current master plan was created in 1997. It represents the overall vision of Omaha for land use and the actions necessary to fulfill that vision. Just to give you a little background, the #1 movie of that year was Men in Black. Bill Clinton was president, and that was the last year the Huskers won a national championship. Development, it's a long time. Development patterns were radically different then than they are today. Fashion has changed, and so have development patterns, and it's the city's responsibility to be a leader in not only amending aspects of the master plan, but comprehensively updating that plan to reflect the vision of the city, for the city as it changes. Thirdly, to increase trust in local government, we recommend amending the charter to require and standardize city-led engagement for development, especially developments that receive city subsidies such as TIF. The goal of robust engagement is to build a strong city. A strong city is made up of strong neighborhoods, and strong neighborhoods are made up of engaged residents. Engagement strengthens relationships between residents, developers, and the city, allowing for sustainable growth that meets the needs of all the parties involved. This helps to keep people here, reduce the brain drain and displacement, and it also contributes to the workforce. A significant reason why One Omaha was created by neighborhood leaders is because those leaders did not feel like they were being engaged in city decisions that impacted their communities. We love the work that we do in supporting strong neighborhood groups. However, the city is in a unique position to set parameters around engagement and requirements for future developments. These guidelines need to guide and mandate developers in creating a better engagement process that emphasizes resident voices at an earlier stage in the development of those plans when those views can be reflected in the development. This will result in better developments, increased trust in government, support for neighborhood development, and overall satisfaction of residents. I want to end by noting that there's a lot of great, strong neighborhood advocates on the Charter Convention, and that this is a really exciting opportunity right now. This is an opportunity to improve city functions to create an equitable 21st century city. Implementing these 3 recommendations will lay the foundation for that transformation to take place. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from Ms. Hamlin? Is that right?
O'Hanlon.
O'Hanlon.
O''H.
I want to say that I'm a neighborhood representative. You're right on target. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions?
Some things that are already in the charter specific to what she was saying. And you have to forgive me, some of these things were removed. There's a couple of, let me see. Section 3.14, Urban Renewal Administrator, I think that was repealed by special election. It has the date of 11/6/84. Section 4.05, Omaha Improvement Commission, repealed in 5/14/74. And then section 4-10, creation of boards, commission, and authorities. If somehow this was tied to our current BIDs that we currently have in Omaha, and creating some sort of council of those improvement districts and tying those to other neighborhood associations, I think it would address the concern that we don't have enough involvement in the neighborhoods in how the charter is moving. So 410 would, if we were actually to suggest an amendment or put something on the books basically saying this creation would be okay and including those BIDs, I think we could achieve what you're looking to do.
Okay, thank you. Again, my thought is, like I mentioned earlier, I've taken down these suggestions. We'll flip them to the subcommittees and can have further discussion at that point. Okay. Any other public? Thank you, Ms. O'Hanlon. Any other public comments? Second somewhere? Second. Okay. No, we have to take a vote. Okay, we're adjourned then. We're adjourned.